Hey everybody, KC here. So as you all know, I love talking about the future. I love that kind of speculation. But I'd never consider myself a futurist of any kind. I'm just a pundit who happens to make good guesses from time to time. But I love talking to futurists because A, they tend to be really, really smart. B, they do a lot of research, which I have no interest in doing. And they can be pretty entertaining. Plus, they can make better guesses than I do. Sometimes. But that brings me to Patrick Schwerdtfeger. And Patrick is a futurist who focuses on disruptive innovation in business and how and why it usually comes from the edges, not from the center of organizations. He's also the author of Pandemic Inc., Trends Driving Business Growth and Success in the New Economy, and Anarchy Inc., Profiting in a Decentralized World with Artificial Intelligence and Blockchain. And next week, he's going to be the keynote speaker at FMI's Energy and Store Development Conference in Orlando, Florida. I caught up with Patrick the other day via Zoom, and I think we had an interesting conversation about technology, business development, actionable data, and where things are going. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Patrick Schwerdtfeger. Well, Patrick Schwerdtfeger, welcome to Morning News Beat.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm delighted to be with you today.
So when you're talking to the FMI conference, I mean, you're going to be talking about disruptive innovation. And maybe I've just been writing about the industry for too long, but it would be my sense that the food industry is one that it's rooted in tradition. And that can be good, that can be bad, but it does tend to be a little innovation resistant. So is part of your goal to kind of to shake them off that, to get them off their pedestal a little bit and get them moving?
Yeah, you could say that, but I'm not doing that by bringing examples in from outside of the industry per se. I will be doing that, but there's actually a lot of innovation happening within the industry already. So the beauty of these conferences is you end up with an audience, and in that audience, there's going to be some companies that might be a little bit behind, or maybe they've got lower gross profit to work with. They don't have as much scale to incorporate some of these things. But then in the same audience, you've got some really large players, really progressive players who are investing aggressively, and so they can actually learn within themselves. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about is how these technologies tend to deploy, because Kevin, everyone talks about the first to market advantage, right? And of course, we all know that's true. The first one there has an advantage, but they pay the most, right? It's expensive. They're the ones who go through the trial and error. They're the ones who have to develop software. They're the ones who have to develop the tools. So there's actually an enormous second mover advantage because once the trial and error process plays out, and we start to see those early success stories and those case histories. And then what happens is that the technology providers, the enterprise software developers, all of those people start incorporating those use cases and those success stories in their service offering. And that's how it deploys to the SME space, the small, medium enterprise. And a lot of the people in the audience will be in the SME space. And in many cases, they can get the same functionality, the same advantages, maybe a year or two later, that the big boys got, but they paid 10 times as much for it. So I'm going to be focusing on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, a common refrain in the industry is I want to be on the leading edge, but I do not want to be on the bleeding edge, right?
Yeah.
I can't how many times I've heard that. So as somebody who's looking at the industry from the outside, when you look at and you see innovations that you think matter, what do you see?
Well, gosh, I mean, you can go in a bunch of different directions here, but I think, effectively you can think about maybe 2 or 3, real primary umbrellas, if you will, and they overlap. It's not like there's only one or the other, but, obviously robotics and automation is one piece. So, and that's showing itself in the warehouse, the distribution network. It's showing itself in in-store apps, for example, or assistants or smart carts, which we're starting to see. Self-checkout is another one that would kind of fall under that, I think. Then a second one is this, maybe a bit more broadly, the data utilization. So, and this is a trend that we've really been playing out now for 20 years. it's becoming more and more cost effective to accumulate data because the cost of sensors is going down and data processing, data storage, that's all coming down in price. So it's become more and more cost effective to accumulate the data. But at the beginning, we didn't really know what to do with it. The businesses didn't necessarily know how to optimize their businesses using that data. And that's what we're starting to see in the whole digital transformation, is how do we actually use the data. And so Amazon's well known for really optimizing their inventory system and their supply chain management system using predictive analytics, and so to kind of minimize inventory and get it just when you need it, or at least to try and achieve that ideal. That's a big use. And dynamic pricing, although dynamic pricing seems to have some problems because the public perception, there's unfairness associated with it, but we're still seeing some experiments there. Staffing requirements, having the right amount of staff, or really the minimum amount of staff possible to provide the same level of service. So that's kind of the second. So you got robotics and automation, data utilization. And then I would say the third one maybe is in the energy optimization space. And we're seeing that really in a lot of different industries. But of course, when you're talking about grocery stores in particular, I mean, we're talking about refrigeration, and there's a lot of energy going into these facilities. So how do you optimize that? And of course, there's the net zero energy building goals that people are, even some governments are starting to mandate that into the future. So the building should produce as much energy as it consumes, with solar panels on the roofs or whatever. So there's a lot of effort there too. Now, again, all three of these, they really do overlap with each other, but that's kind of the broad categories that I'm looking at.
It's interesting when you talk, especially on the energy one, it seems to me, one of the things that I've noticed is that, again, not every retailer, but a lot of retailers, as they start to invest in energy-related initiatives, are being very upfront about the fact that they're doing that with their customers, because there seems to be a recognition that customers will see that as a positive. They will see that they would rather shop. They believe, and I think it's a fair observation, that they believe customers will be more willing to shop at retailers that are trying to do the right thing when it comes to energy than those that aren't.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's one of the real shifts that's taken place sort of in the culture, is you've got more people, especially the younger you are, who are sort of want to shop at places that represent their values or their belief systems.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing more and more, and again, this is not unique to retail, but really across industries, the use of technology, and let's just say the use of technology to increase efficiency, just in general, is becoming a marketing tool. And even the energy companies are talking about what they're doing to be more efficient, or to invest in renewable technologies and so on. So, and there's, you could take this is a massive oversimplification, but it's very true that, people don't change their minds very often. And so, especially when we get a little bit older. So the people out there whose ages start with a 4, a 5, or a 6, for example, and mine starts with a 5.
Mine starts with a 6, so I understand what you're talking about.
Okay, so we're both in that second category, where you and I might change our minds. That's possible. I know I certainly changed my mind, but broadly across the population, where we're a little more sticky with our opinions. But meanwhile, the younger people whose ages start with a 2, 3, or a 4, they're growing up in the new world, and we see this everywhere, where the older folks believe that eventually the younger folks are going to figure it out and finally start doing things the right way. Yeah. And that's not going to happen. They're going to rebuild the world in their own, according to their own vision. And we're either going to adapt, or we're going to lose out to other people who do adapt. So, and so certainly, like, is it a marketing tool for people who are, 55, 60 years old? Maybe, but it's a much bigger marketing tool, certainly for people who are 25 or 30, and really see some of the things that are happening around the world, and the climate, the the climate implications that we're seeing already now. So they're very passionate, and in fact, the younger generations are kind of well known at this stage to be really frustrated with the world, and they're having a hard time. Like they really are the first couple of generations here. Let's say the millennials and Gen Z are really the first time where people are angry with the later, like their parents, for example, for having polluted the world more than they should have. And again, I'm not here to talk about whether or not that's true or not, or different political opinions, but the opinion exists within those younger generations, and companies can leverage that and use the efforts that they're making from an efficiency perspective to a marketing advantage, and make that very transparent for their customers to see.
I think one of the things I've noticed a couple of places I think you said is that when innovation takes place and change takes place within organizations, it tends to come from the edges and not from the center. What do you mean by that?
Well, I should thank you for going through the content and seeing that. It's a huge thing. It's something I'm very passionate about, actually. So there's actually two kind of broad buckets of innovation. The first is incremental innovation, where things get a little bit better year after year after year. The Ford F-150 2023 is going to be a little bit better than the 2022. And incremental innovation is awesome. I mean, we are optimizing our planet with incremental innovation, but that's very different than disruptive innovation. Because incremental innovation comes from the center of expertise, right? The scientists, the specialists, the people in the research and development departments who are figuring out how to make things a little bit better and better. It comes right from the center, so everyone's very aware of it. But disruptive innovation, that's what comes from the sides, and that's why it's disruptive, of course, because you don't see it coming. Quite often, it comes from like an adjacent market. It comes from an industry that's related. It's not exactly the same, but it's related. And so you see these splinters where all of a sudden technology in one industry shows up in another, and the people are completely caught off guard by it. The classic example is Kodak. I mean, Kodak was the company that developed the digital camera. Like, they were the first ones to develop it. And they looked at it, they said, this is garbage. The resolution's low, it's expensive. We're not going to do it. We're going to stick with what we're doing. And then lo and behold, 10 years later, it's gone along that exponential curve, and now you can't keep up, and they declared bankruptcy as a result. So, and
the other thing is they saw it as disrupting their film business, right? And they said, right, and it was going to hurt. It was going to hurt their short-term profits, and therefore, and they couldn't see that if they own the market in the long term, it was that eventually that was going to be better for them.
Yeah. There's people kind of, and executives, we're talking about smart people. I mean, these are well-educated, very successful people who get caught off guard on occasion, and it's because they end up on defense, saying, who's going to steal our lunch? Like, we have to protect our lunch here. Someone's going to steal our revenue. Someone's going to steal our business model. And in my opinion, that is literally the opposite approach. Like, this is a time for offense. This is a time to say, who else's lunch can we eat? Because other businesses will fail. Other business models will fail or significantly be revolutionized. So what can you bring in-house, and all of a sudden expand your business model into doing something that maybe you hadn't done in the past, but that represents a new revenue opportunity. So I think disruptive innovation should be an opportunity for executives, but they have to be on offense to capture those opportunities.
Well, it's a cliche, but I think it's absolutely true that if companies are not looking at their business models and figuring out how to put themselves out of business, and then doing that thing that would put them out of business, all they're doing is ignoring the fact that somebody else is going to do it. And then they don't have a business left, right? I mean, in the same way that, Barnes and Noble and Borders didn't see the opportunity that Jeff Bezos saw. Jeff Bezos was a finance guy, but he saw something they didn't see, again, because he came from the outside, not from the core.
And the reality is that that's the role that someone like me, like this is what we try to do is, I'm not the expert in retailing or grocery stores in particular. I would never pretend to be, So the ideas that come and that will inevitably define the industry, 10 years from now, they're never going to come from someone like me. They're going to come from people in the audience. But the opportunity I have, and what I love so much, is that I'm always intersecting with different industries constantly. So I have case histories. I literally have thousands of them from different industries. And so I can, usually I only have an hour, it makes it always a little bit hard. But when you bring, that's my opportunity, is to try and shake up people's thinking a little bit and get them, talking to each other and questioning things. And that's what inevitably results in those ideas where someone's going to be like, hey, we could do this. We never thought about doing this. And that's, I'm not saying that, that's exclusively my domain, but that's where I see myself contributing, is to give them a way to think outside of their silo and their regular way of doing business.
I know you're going to talk a little bit about business, where business development and blockchain sort of meet. Can you give me what do you mean when you say that?
Well, blockchain is it's changing. That's for sure. There was a time when supply chain management was really like the leading use case of blockchain. But it turns out that, having kind of a small private blockchain, like you're better off just having it on a regular server. You don't need to, it doesn't need to be a blockchain format. That's not the most efficient way to do it. But meanwhile, the chain of custody piece is continuing to develop. So, for example, you could have GMO foods or organic foods and so on. Like you could realistically have a food where it's got a little, a mango or something has a barcode on it. You could scan that barcode and have a complete inventory of exactly where that thing was grown and the path it took to get to the store shelf and so on. And I think that level of information is going to be required, is going to be expected by the younger generations, and certainly some retailers are going to provide it. Let's say, for example, and I don't know if this is true at all, but let's say Whole Foods does something like that and provides that level of information, and then their competitor doesn't as much. Well, that could be again a marketing advantage that they could communicate with their customers. So, and blockchain can facilitate that sort of stuff, but it's not the panacea that people thought it was, 5 or 7 years ago, or actually, no, I shouldn't even say that long, but say 3 to 5 years ago, people were really saying is the solution to all things. I do think there's a macro trend going from centralized structures to decentralized structures, and I think that will continue. But it doesn't necessarily, not everything has to be on a blockchain to be effective.
What about AI? You going to talk about AI?
Well, that's a big one, and that is playing a larger and larger role. So, you think about what's the early, where are the success stories in AI? Of course, a lot of it, you can think about autonomous driving, for example, which is absolutely a machine learning. So the first question is what actually defines AI compared to just a good algorithm, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great just data analytics. Like so where's the line? Well, the line, the differentiation is that AI machine learning has the capacity to learn. It has the capacity to improve over time, which implies you've got a data feedback loop somewhere, right? Where the data, you're doing something and then the results of that are coming back into the system and allowing the system to further optimize in the future. So, or maybe there's a data stream coming from the outside somehow, which is constantly improving the results of it and so on. And that's happening for sure. But one of the biggest areas, or let's say the first real use case of AI commercially was all the recommendation engines, where you shop somewhere and it says other customers, here's something else you might like, or Pandora originally, like it would recommend music or even Netflix with movies and so on. But now we're starting to see, and again I come back to Amazon because they really have, they've got an enormous amount of capital, so they have the ability to develop these systems. But what they've been able to do to anticipate demand before it is actually there is really remarkable. And the way that they are running their distribution network and getting products closer to where they're likely to be needed, at the time the demand is there. And we see this so much right now, especially like, you look at Instagram and TikTok and these sorts of things where you could have a trend, I was just reading a case history the other day of like a mascara that someone ended up doing a video on this mascara and it went viral. And next thing you know, there's a few dozen influencers who are all looking at the same product, and there was this giant spike in demand for that product. But literally 2 weeks later, that spike came all the way back down again. So the company was trying to chase the demand, but of course, it wasn't responsive enough. So by the time the product got to the store shelves, the demand had already come back down again. So, now I'm not suggesting that an AI could predict something like that, but they can get closer to it. Right. And sometimes it's remarkable to see, how close they can actually get to things that you think there's no way it could anticipate this, but in fact there is a way you can anticipate it. And we see this in the stock market as well, where it turns out you can anticipate moves in many cases, and some of the applications of machine learning is going into stock market applications just because there's such an obvious profit motive. But the same thing can be used in retail as well.
Well, and I mean, listen, I think we've all had the experience with Amazon where you order something and it gets to you so fast, you say, how is that even possible, right? I mean, I've ordered stuff at 8 o'clock at night and it's been here by noon the next day. And it's not been groceries, it's been something out of a warehouse somewhere. And it's extraordinary the degree to which they have been able to use predictive analytics to sometimes apparently violate the laws of physics. I mean, that's the only way I can put it. Yeah. And I think that to me, that's a very real challenge to quote unquote traditional retailers who are still depending on people coming to the stores or, getting a 2-hour delivery window or, whatever it happens to be, trying to build infrastructures that if they're not exactly as the same as they were, at least have some similarity, right? They're within paradigms or within boundaries that they understand. And to me, that's a huge challenge for retailers, is to get beyond that, because I think you're right. That's what consumers are going to expect.
Yeah, and some of these things kind of make me a little bit sad, because there's no question that the larger companies, and I have nothing against larger companies, but I also have an appreciation for the smaller business model. And we've seen this, obviously, again, grocery store, you got 30,000 SKUs, everyone needs the staples, but it turns out that the fringe products are as important to motivate a buyer as anything else. So if there's some particular, salsa that the customer likes and you've got it and the Walmart down the street doesn't have it, well, that sometimes is reason enough to go to that store because you love that particular salsa. So the companies are in this dilemma where, if you back up through the distribution network and the supply chain, historically everything's been, done by the pallet, for example. And so it's got to fit on a pallet. But some of these niche products, whatever people pronounce that differently. But a pallet would last for a whole year, but you only sell a few of them. But meanwhile, if you don't stock that particular item, that's enough in some cases for the retailer to leave the store and go to a competitor's store. So it's a real tricky thing. But in any case, just to kind of address the obvious, the large companies will increasingly be using robotics for the most part within the distribution. We're seeing some unbelievable pick pack. There's what do they call ASRS, the automated storage and retrieval systems. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I actually spoke at a conference that was exclusively warehouse equipment, and the technology there is just unbelievable. And it does have, in the grocery field, these things can literally pack a particular box for a particular customer, along rails that are above. And there's 10,000 of these things side by side, and the robots can go and fill them all just according to what they've ordered. So it's really amazing. But that is capital intensive to put something like that together. So it does take the large companies to be able to pull it off. Having said that, some will, and they will probably steal customers as a result. So the smaller retailers maybe focus more on the niche products or having a very specific thing that they specialize in to keep their customers. I don't know where that's going to go, but for sure the technology will play a role.
To go back to what you were talking about before, is the change you're talking about now, is that kind of change, is that incremental or is it revolutionary? Is it revolutionary and disruptive?
Yeah, I actually would say that that's, mostly incremental. I mean, things are just getting better and better. But like, for example, there's a company, I forget the name of it now, but they're developing like an autonomous vehicle which literally has groceries in it, and that vehicle can drive into a neighborhood, for example, and people can there's the pictures I have of it, there's actually produce and things inside, so it's effectively a refrigerator with produce and vegetables and so on, and people can buy it, and the it knows what you've bought and you pay for it. And so you have these these food deserts, these neighborhoods that don't have any grocery stores. All of a sudden a vehicle like that could come in and play a role. That to me strikes me much more as a disruptive technology, because it's kind of out of the box. You wouldn't think about that if it's being a competitor. You look in the autonomous driving space, and I'm going to be going into that in some detail, just because it's inevitably going to affect virtually every industry. But you've got two elements. It's actually not just one revolution, it's two. One is the autonomous driving, but the other is the electrification of transport. And electricity is about 80% cheaper than gas on a per mile basis, depending on the vehicle. In some cases up to 90%. And then of course the salary of the driver takes a big piece. So between the two, you could see, like right now, Uber and Lyft charge, on average in the United States about $2 per mile. Again, it varies, but it's an average. But they're saying, Elon Musk, for example, made a presentation where he was suggesting that their robo-taxi fleet, whenever it finally comes, will probably be charging roughly a tenth of that, maybe 18 cents a mile. And so you get to a point where when you do the math, like for example, Starbucks is a public company. You can see their profit and loss statement. It's all public. If you look at their marketing expense to get customers in the door, it could be comparable or maybe even cheaper for them to offer free transport in a little mobile Starbucks, where you're getting a captive audience. There's a high likelihood they're going to buy something while they're on the trip. And so they could provide free transport. So then that's, now we're talking disruption. And you start thinking, okay, well, what else? Maybe you could have yoga buses, or you could have meditation buses, or you could have video gaming buses, or quiet time buses with internet and so on. Who knows? But if it's that cheap to provide transport, then maybe a whole bunch of different companies might provide transportation for free in exchange for a captive audience. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that to me is an example of like something very disruptive, which could come along that very few people see coming, and it could change a whole bunch of different markets all at the same time.
Okay, so last question. Last time you were in a supermarket, was there something where you looked around and said, oh man, this really needs to be disrupted? Somebody needs to come in and change this. Like, conceivably it was whatever the worst part of the experience was.
That's a great question, Kevin. I guess the thing that comes to mind, and if I thought about it longer, I might come up with something different, but there's one thing that just came to mind immediately, where I was looking to buy something and I just couldn't make sense of, like, where is the actual price of this particular item? There's a whole bunch of items, and the signs, it wasn't clear to me. And it's interesting, I actually did an event not long ago for a company, I think it was Lenovo, if I remember correctly, but they actually make digital signage that can go on the shelves themselves, with a little digital display, and that could facilitate, dynamic pricing or something, or maybe a special or something. So maybe something like that. Again, that's capital intensive. We're talking about replacing all of the shelving units and having electricity go through all of them to support all of that. But certainly there's an opportunity, I think, to communicate with the customer in a more efficient way. Like, for example, that's actually, maybe this is a better example. I was looking for something and I didn't know where it was. And so number one, I had to find someone who worked there, which ended up being like, kind of down on the other side of the store, and then he just directed me right back to where I was, just one aisle over. It's such a silly thing, but we've all done that.
Totally.
And now, I was reading a case history about some smart cards that were being developed. I think it was a Kroger affiliate who was doing it, but in any case, you literally, you can put what you're looking for, and it'll give you directions to get right there. It's that sort of thing where, maybe today you need a certain number of staff members, but you need that number of staff members because that 30% of their time is going to be spent answering customer questions. Well, what if that 30% can be answered with a smart card instead? All of a sudden you need 30% fewer people in the store at any one point in time. And even like to see the proliferation of self-checkout, in Costco, for example. I mean, now it's like literally 2/3 of the kiosks are self-checkout, and there's only 1/3, at least the Costco that I go to. And they're processing people so much quicker, so they need fewer human beings in the store. And it's all sad when you look at the, people losing their jobs. But the fact is that will enhance efficiency and lower costs, which inevitably plays out with lower prices.
Oh, sure. Hey, listen, and a record low unemployment rate. I mean, all those things are pushing the industry more, and the availability of technology is pushing the industry in those directions. Well, listen, Patrick, this has been fascinating. I can't wait for your event at FMI. I think you're going to knock their socks off, because I think the future is. I think the future sometimes for this industry can be difficult to focus on because the present is all consuming. Yeah. And so getting people to kind of look not just down the street, but around the corner is going to be hugely valuable. So thank you for doing this on Morning Newsbeat, and good luck at FMI.
Yeah, and thanks for the invitation, Kevin. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.